Welcome back to another episode of Consciously Clueless. I'm your host, Carly, and here we break down complex issues around health, the climate crisis, and social justice through a vegan lens. We'll talk about the magic link between your well being and the planet's health because luckily, choosing a healthier, mindful lifestyle for yourself often creates healthier vibes for our planet too. Staying consciously clueless means getting to show up knowing nothing, but staying open to all that you can learn. From feasting on plant-based meals and reducing waste to learning to meditate, every step you take contributes to your wellness and makes systematic change for the world. You can make a difference. This podcast will show you how. Thank you, Taylor, for being here. I'm really excited to be chatting with you today.
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me.
I have followed you for a while and am continuously inspired by your content and your message. So I have a lot of questions. I have my notes ready, but I would love to start with your vegan journey and then go from there.
Sure, yeah. So I went vegan in 2009. I was, let's see, was I a freshman or sophomore? I can't remember. I was in college and I had already been vegetarian for a few months just because I didn't really love like the taste or mouthfeel
Mm,
of meat. But just by virtue of eating vegetarian and realizing I am a vegetarian, like what does that label mean? It got me researching a little bit more.
hmm
And so then I just started learning more about animal agriculture and then the dairy and egg industries and didn't really want anything to do with that, but wasn't sure how to actually make that transition. And I was lucky enough that the university I was going to had an animal rights group, like a club.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I
And in
remember
two,
I remember going to my first meeting and just really clicking with some of the people and getting involved with them right away. And then later on went to like lead that group when I was
mm.
senior. I can't remember. It's so long ago now. Um, and yeah, it was cool because my university was in a city and the city also had an animal rights group.
Mm.
And so it wasn't like I was just limited to this bubble of being a college student. I was able to get involved in the community at large and meet other people too. It wasn't like I was just interacting with college age vegans, but vegans of all ages and walks of life and getting involved in lots of different kinds of advocacy outside of the campus bubble. So that was great. That was so wonderful. So for me, it's always been about the animals from day one.
So your original impetus was the animals. Were you already interested in nutrition at that point?
Yeah, these are the interesting paths, the veganism and the nutrition, like parallel, but also intersecting at different points of my life. So I had been interested in nutrition. I started university as a pre-med student, but I'd always been interested in nutrition. I had taken some college nutrition classes when I was in high school. I was just really interested in the biochemistry part of it. But I was raised in a family that was like, oh, you're smart, so you should be a doctor. I was like, okay,
Yeah.
I guess that's what I'm going to do. And then getting into the pre-med field of study and just learning more about the field of medicine and also the residency and med school and what that did to people and what that was like. It just wasn't the kind of life I wanted to have, nor was it how I wanted to help people because I realized you see so many patients a day for a very brief amount of time and you don't really get
Yeah.
to know people. You don't get to see them super regularly. Like there's no counseling really. And so that's where I was drawn back into nutrition and learned more about the field of dietetics and what is a registered dietitian and what do they do. So midway through my undergrad experience, I switched over from being pre-med to being a nutrition major.
When you were originally letting the dominoes fall of veganism and learning all these things, was it pretty instantaneous that you were also interested in food? Because I feel like so often food is an inroad for people, but you came in with that animal activism route. Were you then pretty quickly, oh shit, this too?
Yeah, it's interesting, especially as a college student. I was still on the meal plan. I was living in dorms. I didn't have the opportunity to cook much. So for me, like the culinary perspective wasn't really huge. But yeah, I was able to change what I ate. It wasn't an overnight thing for me whatsoever. I remember having that little crate of snacks in my dorm room with granola bars that still had milk chocolate chips in it that I ate. I don't know, SpaghettiOs or random stuff, goldfish crackers,
Yeah,
all that
yeah.
stuff. I'm like, I'm living off of student loans. I'm just gonna eat this up. I'm not gonna dump this stuff or whatever it was. And just learning to eat vegan back then, it was a lot of peanut butter and jelly and pasta with veggies and salads and cereal with soy milk and cheeseless pizza. There wasn't a ton of vegan options around, and especially not in campus dining. But like I said, I did live in a city, so there was a lot of good food, like the corner falafel place or the Ethiopian
Mm,
restaurants or Thai restaurants. I was really lucky to have access to those, but they also cost a lot more money, especially when I was already paying for a meal.
right. When you were making this transition in your life at 19, 20, I feel like people always have lots of opinions on what other people are doing with their lives, but I feel like especially when you're still in that age, people have extra opinions about what you should or shouldn't be doing. Did you have that experience?
Yeah, that's so interesting because that is our coming of age time of life. For a lot of us, it's when we're first getting true independence and really exploring
Hmm.
who are we, what actually matters to us, how do we want to live our lives. And so I feel like it's just a shame for people to be, I don't know, extinguishing that. I feel like it's so important for people to explore and experiment. I only remember a couple of comments from one person in particular in my life, but other than that, no, people just went with it. And I think also it was clear, like, oh, this isn't just a diet or a phase or whatever. Taylor's
Right.
now like really into animal rights. Taylor really cares about animals, doing all this stuff. So I think it became apparent this is just who she is, and these are the values that she has.
So you said diet, and I want to jump into that and segue in a little bit because a post you made a couple years ago that I remember seeing and just being like, yes, 100% yes. You talked about being an anti-diet vegan dietitian. And I was just like, that phrase right there, I thought was so fascinating, especially in the online world of nutrition misinformation, diet culture, all of those things that get packaged together, right? And so this label, I would love for you to talk about it a little bit. What does it mean to be an anti-diet vegan dietitian?
Yeah, thanks. I know it's like a mouthful and also confusing. So when I say anti-diet, I mean anti-diet culture
Yeah,
and everything that comes with that. And that could be a whole other, I mean, that could be a whole podcast in of itself, let alone a whole other
true.
episode, because there's so much under that. I mean, it's really linked to like systems of oppression and a lot of stuff. It's not just a surface level thing. But what I really mean by that is restricting what we're eating, becoming obsessive, really taking this individualistic healthist approach to things, meaning
Hmm.
believing that A, health is entirely within individual control, and B, that it's this moral obligation that people have. Because there's just so much shaming that goes on out there. And I definitely fell for a lot of it. Like I was, especially because I went to university in Cleveland. That's where the Cleveland Clinic is. That's where the Esselstyns live. We had
Interesting.
a screening of Forks Over Knives. Dr. Esselstyn and his wife came and did a presentation for our animal rights
Oh,
group. Like
wow.
we were in it. I was in it. That was the age of the big, those documentaries really coming out and being mainstream, like the anti-oil stuff becoming really big, Whole Foods plant-based. And there's just so much sensationalism there, and I've learned so much, not only through my own experience, but becoming a registered dietitian, working with hundreds, if not thousands, I don't know, at this point, patients and clients over the years, of really realizing the damage that kind of stuff can do to people's relationship with food and how much of a slippery slope it is into disordered eating. And the
Hmm.
reality is, we don't need to be really obsessed or eat in a super strict, rigid way to be healthy. That's just not true.
Is this something that you were passionate about from the beginning of that journey with nutrition and being a dietitian, or is it something that you dove in and you went, wow, there's a lot of bullshit here?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Thank you. Not at all. I was not aware of it. Training to become a dietitian is very much weight centric as well. A lot of emphasis on being at a quote unquote healthy weight, restricting calories for people who are in larger bodies, that sort of thing. And we just don't blink an eye at it, right? Because it's just how the medical field practice, that's the way our world operates. This drive for thinness at all costs without really critically analyzing it or even the research that it's based on, which is pretty faulty in of itself. So yeah, I was trained in a pretty traditional way. And it wasn't until I got into my own practice that I was really putting the pieces together and seeing the harm I was causing by working with people on trying to lose weight. And not only how harmful that can be, but just how fruitless it is. It
Mm.
just doesn't work for 95% of people. People are just constantly trying diets, going on diets, going off of diets, and it just doesn't work. And it's so stressful, and it can lead to a lot of guilt and shame for people. And I was realizing like this isn't adding up. Like I'm doing everything I was taught to do. I'm using all the tools in my
Yeah.
toolbox. My clients are feeling stuck. I'm feeling stuck. This doesn't feel good. And so I started learning about alternate approaches or more of the like criticisms of this kind of
Mm.
weight centric model. I was like, this actually makes a lot of sense. And again, there's a lot more there in terms of how it's linked to different systems of oppression. Yeah, I'll just stop there.
No, I would love a little bit more discussion around that. Like, what are those links? Because we talk a
Yeah.
lot on this show and in this work about those systems of oppression and how they're all connected. But I think that maybe diet culture isn't one that is as easily linked for people to see how that ties into systems.
That's right, because people think, oh, I'm just trying to be healthy. I'm just trying to do the right thing. And of course, we want to feel good. We want to live long, vibrant lives. However, that doesn't mean that we have to put ourselves through all of these restrictive methods when it comes to food and nutrition. That again, A, don't work. They don't lead to sustainable weight loss long term. And B, there's actually side effects that are not so great for our physical and mental health. So, weight stigma is a term to describe stigmatizing people based on their weight. We stigmatize larger bodies. You don't even have to think about it to know that in our culture, thinner is better, fatter is worse, right? Even the term fat is oh, like that's such a
Yeah.
bad word. And it's not, and it shouldn't be. And there's a movement of people reclaiming that term, just like folks in the LGBTQ movement have, reclaimed the term queer.
Mhm.
So it is used as a pejorative, unfortunately, but I use it as a neutral descriptor of body size, just following the lead of those folks. And so there's so much that comes with that. And we're learning now as we're getting better research that a lot of the, shall we call it, like negative outcomes associated with fatness may not be to like the physical fatness on one's body, but their
Mm.
experience of being stigmatized in the world, not only just like the microaggressions, navigating the world as a fat person and how the world is just not created for fat people, to be comfortable for fat people, to be welcoming or kind of fat people, but specifically within healthcare. I mean, there's a lot of really interesting research on this in terms of providers, namely physicians, having their own stigma against
Yeah.
people who are larger. They spend less time with those patients. They don't listen to them as much. They don't believe them as much. They are less likely to give them certain tests. And so they're just told, oh, just diet, exercise, just lose weight. All their problems are blamed on this. Meanwhile, their real issues are going unrecognized, undiagnosed. And then so things are delayed, which could lead to worse outcomes. There's also surgeries and procedures that are withheld because they say people, oh, you're too heavy. You can't have this surgery. Come back when you lose X amount of pounds, which doesn't make sense because bariatric surgery exists, which is surgery where unfortunately, they alter and amputate part of your digestive tract to create a state of malnutrition to make people lose weight. It's really bananas when you think about what it
Mm.
is. And they're pushing these surgeries. Okay, so I can be put under anesthesia and put under the knife so you can shrink my body, but you won't give me a hip replacement or like you won't fix my
Wow.
knees. So that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the stigma part of weight itself. And then there's also a lot of connections to, there's a really interesting book called Fearing the Black Body, the racial origins of fat phobia, and just how
Mm.
body types differ by different, depending on where we're from and our makeup. And so it's really interesting to look at the history of, well, when did thinness become considered beautiful or desirable in the Western world? And why is that? And there's some link there with the transatlantic slave trade. And it's just really fascinating. I recommend that book if anyone wants to learn more.
That's so interesting. And then, of course, adding, because of intersectionality, adding any other factors on top of having a body that our system has deemed not worthy to even spend more time with, but then being a person of color, being a queer person, I'm imagining then navigating that system is tenfold harder.
100%. Yep. Having any sort of physical disability. Yes. Presenting, being a woman, presenting as femme, like anything like that. You're absolutely right. Yeah, it's tough. And that's what I mean too by healthism and this obsession with healthiness, especially in
Mm.
like the plant-based spaces. What about people who have health conditions that cannot be helped or prevented or reversed or cured by diet and nutrition? Or say there is a vegan who ends up getting cancer. Are you going to say it's their fault because they didn't eat quote unquote clean enough? There unfortunately is a lot of that out there. Or I've had people tell me they've been out at protests and people have told them like, hey, stand back. We don't want the fat people at the front. We don't want our movement to appear this way. You're giving it
Holy
literally,
shit.
it's awful. Oh my gosh, yes. There's so much sexism and fat phobia within our own movement. And it's not just indirect or implicit. There's a lot of explicit shaming going on. And so, yeah, there's layers upon layers of this. Some of it is really in your face and some of it not so much.
So you talked in a post a while back about something that I found really fascinating, and it was this idea that being anti-diet culture and being vegan can both cause some maybe like grief and disconnection. And what I appreciate, one of the things I appreciate about the things you put into the world is that you're not afraid to call out those uncomfortable truths. You're saying, I'm a vegan dietitian. I am on this team. I am on this side. And also, here's the realities that can come from claiming these things. Why do you think that can have similar feelings to maybe choosing to be vegan and choosing to be anti-diet culture intentionally?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. To me, it's all about going against the grain and just being countercultural. I mean, if someone's vegan, they know that, right? You know what it's like. We live in a non-vegan world. It's not the easiest thing. It's doable, of course. That's why we're doing this and we want other people,
Right.
but it's hard. Not only just like practically speaking, but just by being awake to the immense suffering of animals and navigating this world and having to be aware of it and see it constantly is hard, right? And
Mhm.
so there's a lot of grief there. And then I feel the same way about once the veil is lifted and you really see the truth behind all of the diet culture and focus on weight and this and that, that can be hard too. I mean, I've had clients who are like, yeah, I don't have anything to talk about with my coworkers anymore because at the lunch
Whoa.
table, everyone's just talking about their diet. And I don't like A, that's triggering for me now, but B, it's I don't want to contribute. I don't want to participate in that. And you realize how much of the world is obsessed with that or just passing comments people make or friends and family. It's just so much of what people talk about. And even our healthcare providers, I mean, it's everywhere. Billboards, it's literally everywhere. Magazines, of course, social media. And so not only are we just faced with it like constantly, but just again, navigating this world when your values don't align with that, when you see the harm that it causes and you're trying to just live in this world that is making it
Mhm.
difficult. Not only do we need to process our own grief, but we have to be constantly working on our own resilience.
Do you use that word diet when talking with clients about plant-based eating, or is that something you even move away from in terms of, I know, rejecting diet culture, just the word diet. Like I try not to use plant-based diet all the time because I feel like I'm getting like flagged as promoting a diet in terms of we can use that word to just say this is what I'm eating, right? But we
Right,
do not think of it that way, or at least I don't.
right. I know, totally. I wish it could just be that neutral word, just to mean a way of eating. So for me, it's context specific. Sometimes I'll say eating pattern, like a vegan eating pattern, but that's
Mm,
not like that does not flow. It's awkward. Sometimes I'll use the term vegan diet, but just like we were talking about the term fat or queer, like reclaiming the term diet, can it
right.
just be neutral again? Because it's not like the keto diet, the paleo diet, the whatever diet. It's not that, which is why there's this whole, it's a plant-based lifestyle, but it's like when you look at promoting, it's still, and only eat ABC and never eat XYZ. Okay, which is why I do a lot of kind of talking about how to spot a diet because it's really sneaky nowadays because people are onto this. They're like, oh, diet
Yes.
is out. It's all about wellness and it's a lifestyle and blah, blah, blah. And you can call it whatever you want, but if you're still telling people to control and restrict their eating, it's still a diet, which is different than being vegan, right? For the animals. And some people get confused by
Mm,
that because they're like, I'm restricting animal, like I'm not eating meat and eggs and dairy and honey, like I'm restricting those things. But let's look at the intention behind it. If it's about fear and control, right? If it's about you're afraid of the calories or the carbs, or you're afraid about, you're terrified if you eat 1 cube of cheese, you are going to get cancer and die. That is very different from
wow. Yeah.
I am choosing to boycott this industry that I vehemently disagree with, and I'm taking a stance, and this is just one way of me showing my support for those animals who are oppressed by this. Very different, both in, yeah, the space that it takes up in our brain, but also just our whole that relationship with food, our mental health, our thoughts and feelings and experience around all of that.
I struggle sometimes with how much to talk about food because I want to show, I think it's fun to see what people are actually eating when you have no idea what that looks like. And that you don't have to be a chef to eat more plants and all of the things, and also to not equate veganism only with food. But it is such an important part. I love the way you said that this is one way I am sticking to this decision I've made based on a system I oppose. But it's a big way because, and you've talked about this too, where food is love. Food is such an important thing that we gather for and gather over that I struggle sometimes to find the balance of what feels right and helpful and not just showing people that side.
Yeah, you're not alone. I struggle with that too, to be honest, especially on social media. And I
Yeah.
work in the eating disorder space now, so it's like extra tricky and you never know who's
Mm,
following you and what they're struggling
interesting.
with. Of course, that's on them, not on me, but I'm cognizant of that and I want to try to be as safe of a space as possible. So I try not to show exact portions. Like I'll either zoom in or like
Mm,
show the whole tray of food, not just like my plate of food or just like a part of my plate or something like that. I also
interesting.
always give reminders of this is what I'm eating, doesn't mean that's what you need to be eating. Never do what I eat in a day, never show like a whole day of eating or anything like that. That just breeds comparison. But yeah, I agree that it's important in our space to show how joyful food can still be, how yummy it can be, how nourishing and revitalizing it can be still if you're not eating animals. But again, like I'm very cognizant of folks who may have problems with food. And so I also like to show variety. I'll show my quinoa, tofu, and kale, but also show the donut I got or
Yeah.
fries I had or whatever it is. So it's not just what am I really saying? I think that's something to ask ourselves. What am I
Hmm.
saying? Also, why am I posting this or why am I sharing this? What is the intention here? And if I zoom out, what is the overall message if I were to look at a week, month, year of kind of the imagery or the content that I'm sharing? If I want to be promoting flexibility and abundance and joy with food, is my content conveying that or might it be something different? I've had people reach out saying it's so helpful to see. Please keep sharing that. So I remind myself of that all the time. And this is something I talk about with my peers sometimes too in the eating disorder space. We don't want to show food. We don't want to show our bodies. We don't want anyone making any assumptions or comparing or anything like that. And I don't think there's any perfect way to show up, but just being organic and authentic, of course, but also doing that quick check-in. What's my intention here? What's my purpose?
I'm sure this comes up a lot too when you're working with people, especially like you said in the eating disorder space, but why we are having food, right? Like why we are gathering, why we are, whether it's celebratory, whether it is to cope and to use as a tool, maybe in unhealthy ways. There's so many reasons we come to food, which I think for some people that you talk about veganism and they're automatically like really angry with you when that happens. There are some specific ties. People get really upset about food, and like you are trying to tell them everything they've known and everything they've eaten has been bad to this point. And that can be really tricky too. And I copy and paste sometimes the same line in some of my content where it's, I'm not telling you you're bad. I'm saying these systems of oppression suck. And here's some ways to counteract that. But talking to people about food.
It's super tricky. Yeah, it is. And food is something, like you said, it is a systems thing. And we as individuals can still make an impact, right? And I don't think it is one or the other. I think it has to be
Mm,
both. And it's
mm,
okay, what's in your power, right? When we look at that standard vegan definition from the Vegan Society, it says as far as is possible and practicable. So that's going to look different for everyone. And whenever I say that, I feel like I have to clarify that's not a free pass, right? But it's this acknowledgement that is going to look different for everyone. Do you need to take medication? Those are tested on animals. Is there
yep.
something that has gelatin or whatever? That's just the real life of it. And honestly, that is way more sustainable than people who are trying to do things perfectly, which is impossible, by the way. But people are much more likely to be like lifelong true vegans and advocates and activists if they're taking a much more realistic approach to
Hmm.
things. But yeah, I think we need both, right? Really putting pressure on systems and corporations and politicians and lawmakers while doing what we can personally. And then there's this added layer of even if what we did individually didn't make that much of a difference, would you want to? Would you want that energy in your body? Come on. If you can be happy and healthy without eating flesh or secretions from other animals, wouldn't you want to? And so I think it's a little bit different than other systems of oppression we look at or other boycotts or other systems
Mm.
that we might try to fight in terms of this is something I'm putting in my body and knowing I'm literally chewing someone else's muscle right now. That's just wild.
Yeah, I think that that's such a good reminder. And I think that with even just sharing things about like sustainability, sometimes I have gone through these phases of being someone creating content on the internet for a few years now. I was just being like, "Ugh, composting, I could share about composting. I could share about how to store your veggies and make them last longer. And then sometimes I get in these phases where I'm like, I don't know, is that doing enough? Are people understanding that I'm not telling them to stop there, that you have to do more than compost? But then I'm like, but don't you want to try? Don't you want to try to live in the ways that you think are going to actually be sustainable for the long term, even if they're not making the biggest impact right now? If you can do them and it feels good and maybe it saves you from freaking money and time at the same time, then like, why wouldn't you want to do that? If
Yeah,
it's in your means, right? If it's in your means, you have the privilege to
exactly.
try.
And it's all about finding out what works for you, right? Because there's a million and one little actions that we can take to help animals, help the climate, to help the earth, to help whatever.
Yep.
And not no single one of us is going to do all of them, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
figuring out, like you said, what do you have the means and privilege to do? What fits into your life? Yeah, and I'm just thinking some clients of mine who are struggling with food and they're like terrified of eating something because of like the packaging that it comes in. And it's like
Mm.
you can't even eat enough. Like I don't think you need to be worrying about the plastic waste. Meanwhile, all these corporations and blah 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 blah. It's yes, our individual actions make a difference, but let's be realistic about where we are. Like I'm just trying to help you eat enough. Like the tofu carton is okay. It's okay. Or the carton that the soy milk comes in, it's all right. But it's tough because I know when you're someone who cares deeply, it's easy to fall down that rabbit hole and get super demoralized, or even to feel paralyzed yourself. Everything I do is harmful. And it's like, oh,
Yeah, been there.
that's our world. And so how do we support one another and claw our way back out of that hole and find out like, okay, here's what I can do. And I'm feeling good. I'm feeling confident in myself and I'm feeling okay with it. And as long as I believe as long as you're being honest with yourself, are you doing the
Mm,
most? Are you doing what you can? And being aware of too when it's crossing over into harming you. And I'm
right.
talking mostly about mental health here because we got to watch out for that. And harming ourselves it's not worth it. And if you don't care enough about yourself for that to be your motivation, just consider that you're not going to be able to do as much good if you're not taking care of yourself or if you're not here.
Yeah. And showing up for yourself is such a move for the collective. And that has become, I think, clearer and clearer to me in the last few years because self-care is great in the grand scheme. And of course, there's like stereotypes that come up when we say self-care and it's been commodified and all of the things. But truly being able to know what you need and that discernment is the biggest tool, the most powerful tool to not only help you, but help your relationships with your family, your friends, your coworkers, and then enable you to do the change that you want to do because the world is so overwhelming.
That's right.
I would love to chat with you in terms of relationships, family and friends and vegan families. And you are raising a vegan family. And I would love to know what that is like. You're raising a vegan family in a non-vegan world, I should say. And so what has that experience been like for you?
Yeah, my kids are pretty young still, so I feel like I've barely had to navigate some of the situations that are probably going to be more challenging just because
Right.
I'm like the master of their universe at this point.
Yeah.
I have a 2-year-old and a 5-month old, so it's been totally fine. There are just really interesting things that I notice just based on our culture. It's Zero thinks horses are for riding, and it's just because that's what's in books, or she might hear talked about, or that's what's sung in some kid songs, or whatever it might be. It's so
Interesting.
interesting, just the things that they pick up on.
And I
So I know,
suppose at this age, I'm realizing now, and I remember they were little, but 2 years and 5 months, I'm wondering if at this age you're getting more from other people or getting more feedback from others, perhaps, or maybe judgment that you don't always hear or do hear from raising vegan kids.
I think I'm extra privileged in that area because I am a registered dietitian.
If someone's gonna do it, it should be
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, so I feel a little protected there. I've only had one person, and it's funny, it's someone in the animal rights group. They're actually in their 80s. I love them, but they are always checking in. She's still vegan. How's she doing? Really? No animal products whatsoever. I'm like, yep, she's fine. They just don't understand that it's safe and healthy for little kids. But yeah, I mean, they're supplemented adequately. My 2-year-old eats a varied diet. She just started going to this little school program thing once a week. And I had to put down that she's vegan because they have snack time and only vegan snacks. And I'm happy to supply it. But they're like, no, we supply all the snacks because everyone has a million allergies and things have to be like super controlled. So in that way, they're like so used to it. But I
I
got a picture
suppose.
the other day that they were eating graham crackers at school. And I'm like, there's only one brand that I know of that's regularly available that doesn't have honey in it. I don't know if it's that brand. Is that a fight I want to pick? Do I want to ask? And it's, you know what? I'm not going to pick that fight. It's not like they're giving her yogurt or something.
Right. Or a
So it's
burger.
already those little things I'm starting to see. But yeah, even in terms of going to family gatherings or birthday parties or whatever, she always says there is always food for us to eat there, or I just bring stuff for her and we're just used to it. And she hasn't really asked or noticed, hey, why can't I have that? Someone else is having that thing. And we don't really talk about it much. I mean, there's not a ton that's super age appropriate other than we love animals and we don't eat them, but we haven't even touched on that much. She's just already I'm raising her to be a deeply compassionate person who cares about everyone. And so, I think that'll just come naturally. I'm sure there will be challenges, but so far so good. And like I said, I think have some extra protection being a dietitian from like the food shaming or like
Totally.
the people who act worried.
What are things people are worried about most? If there's a top few when it comes to kids' nutrition and eating plant-based, what are the things people think of? Because if there are listeners right now that have little ones and they want any assistance, I would highly recommend, I already highly recommend following Taylor online, but you have a wealth of resources in so many areas. And I love that you're talking about this as well, because I think there are a lot of people that want to do that or are curious, I think, about making that transition for their families, but do get nervous for their kids and want to make sure that they're healthy, right?
Of course. Yeah, of course. And like I said, they do need to be taking certain supplements, just like adult vegans, but growth is very important for
Right.
kids. And so if they're falling behind in their weight, in their height or length or head circumference, like, and by falling behind, I mean on their unique curves, like maybe they're lower percentiles, but if they've always been that lower percentile, that's their normal. So if you're having your regular doctor appointments, they'll be keeping track of that. And I don't want to make it sound like it's a no-brainer because I'm in some vegan parenting Facebook groups and talk about diet culture. I see some things in there that are so wild and make me so scared and sad. But I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to save the world. And then people who are trying to feed their kids like a whole foods only diet or really restrictive, or there's a lot of fear around fortified foods for some reason, which is really it's really unfortunate, and fortified foods are really important for all of us, but especially little kids. So if they're over one, they need to be having calcium fortified soy or pea milk. They should be having a variety of legumes and grains and fruits and vegetables, not restricting fat. Little kids need a lot of fat. So feeding them nuts, seeds, avocado, cooking in oil, like that's all good and fine. They can have packaged food, like it's totally okay.
All right. I'm assuming then some of the things that come up around kids' nutrition is probably the same things that come up when people are asking about adults. Your calcium, your protein, where are they getting that kind of essential stuff?
Yep, exactly. And then it also swings in the other direction where it's gone beyond the vegan world now. You don't need dairy for calcium. True, but we still need calcium. Like it doesn't mean that you don't ever have to think about it. And it's really hard to meet our calcium needs without fortified plant milk. And so if someone's not having fortified plant milk and they're not being very diligent about eating very specific plant foods in large enough quantities every single day to meet their calcium needs, they're going to have to supplement.
Adults and kids, you're saying?
Yeah, and I mean, why? Kids can meet their calcium needs. It's so easy to do with fortified milk. And people would say, oh, broccoli has calcium. Yeah, a tiny amount. Do you have any idea how much broccoli you would have to eat to meet your calcium needs? So I really get annoyed with some of these intentioned talking points within the vegan community where I understand people are trying to make it seem so easy to go vegan. You don't need to worry about your nutrition. It's fine. There's that whole thing about calcium. There's the just eat enough calories and you'll get enough protein. Like there's all these little talking points people have, and not necessarily the most accurate or helpful. And I know this because I've worked with hundreds of vegan clients and I see how people are eating when they come to work with me, and I see how they are or are not supplementing, especially people who have been trying to eat whole foods plant-based can just be, very undernourished. And that can seem confusing for people because we're so obsessed with like fruits and vegetables and greens, right? Those are so nourishing. And yes, and we need other things to be properly nourished too.
I think that's really an important point to make. And I know I've felt this before. It's almost like in the vegan community, you don't want to scare people and you want people to listen. So it's not even lying. It's being like, yes, you can be plant-based and it can be pretty easy. You don't have to worry too hard. You don't have to be a dietitian. Like, I think there's a lot of that messaging because people are just wanting people to pay attention and get them in the door.
Right.
But then you're so right. There are things to be paying attention to. And not only that, it's just that we don't, I'll speak for myself in the United States, in this westernized world, that we don't have a good baseline understanding of nutrition anyway. I didn't know where the hell I was getting this much. I didn't know how much protein I was intaking a day before going vegan. These aren't things that we just inherently know regardless of the diet we grow up with. So I
Right.
think that people are like, oh, if I go vegan, I have to like know all this stuff. And so maybe we should all just know a little bit more about what foods do for our bodies regardless.
Yeah, and in a truly healthy way, not a scary fear mongering. Can we
Yeah.
learn about nutrition as like life-giving and not, again, so much fear about like weight or scaring us about like diabetes or heart disease? And it's really hard to find any conversations around nutrition without like fear mongering or someone who's selling a supplement or a book or something. And it's okay. And full disclosure, I have a course that I sell on nutrition. It's not like there's some like sneaky thing underneath that I'm like, I just feel like there's so much of that going on when people are promoting these diets or like intense ideas around food. And yeah, it's just, it's too bad. And like you said, I do the same where it's not, yes, go vegan, it's awesome. And here are a few things to help you along the way that are really important to know. And you don't need to be this expert. Like you don't need a master's degree in nutrition. You don't need to be a registered dietitian. And you don't even need to count grams of protein. Like you don't, there's a few things, you know, that you can do and information that, you know, you'll be pretty good. If you have concerns, check in with the dietitian, get some personalized guidance. Just, you know, get off social media, like stop getting your health advice there, which is part of why I created my course. Cause I'll put all this stuff in blog posts and social media, which is all jumbled and you can only say too much. And so I created my course because I wanted people to be able to go deeper if they wanted to and have this evidence-based resource that they could go to whenever they wanted. And also my caseload fills up really fast. I've only been working part-time since having kids and I just can't see everyone, which is why I'm also passionate about training other dietitians. So I'll do speaking and
Mm,
consultation to help other dietitians get better versed at vegan nutrition so they can better help their vegan clients because we're not trained on this. Beyond the stereotypical B12 and protein, like learning about plant-based nutrition was a blip in my education. It's probably so much
wow.
more now that it's really more popular, but I graduated undergrad in 2011. That was a while ago and the world has changed quite a bit. Um, so yeah, I think just look at where you're getting your information from. And even regardless of the letters after someone's name, whether it's RD, MD, PhD, consider what they're saying because there are people of all sorts of credentials saying all sorts of stuff. And unfortunately, it doesn't mean that you can trust them. So if they're telling you to be really restrictive, if you're noticing that what they're saying is causing anxiety and fear and a lot of
Mm.
confusion in you, like that should be a red flag for you. And again, if any of this is feeling tricky, just work with someone one-on-one. And by someone, I mean a registered dietitian, not like a wellness coach or nutrition influencer out there, but someone who's actually credentialed. And that might not be me because I'm not licensed in all states. So it's not even a plug for myself, but just you deserve some individualized guidance from someone who knows what they're talking about. If this stuff is feeling tricky, or if you have specific health concerns or allergies and you're not sure like how to work around all of that, or if you've ever had a history of disordered eating, it could be tricky too.
I appreciate that. And I appreciate you mentioning your course too, because I think that is a perfect resource, is something like that where you can go and you're not training to become a dietitian yourself, but you are like, yeah, I need some basics because I want to know about how to fuel my body. That's the reason.
Yeah, and I was so excited to make that course because there was nothing like it out there in terms of it's not this thing that's convincing you to go vegan and telling you that like you're gonna reverse your diabetes and never have oil and blah, like again the diet culture like plant-based version of it because again I know how harmful that can be and so it's like here's what you need to know, here's the science, here's how to do it, here's how to feel nourished and satisfied, and I'm gonna actually myth bust all of these things rather than telling you to restrict them. Yes, you can have some sugar, yes, you can have some oil, it's okay. And again, if that's feeling tricky, if you struggle with binge eating or whatever it is, please get some help. You don't have to struggle alone and just, yeah, maybe get off the internet for a minute and talk to someone real about it.
That feels like good life advice for all of us, honestly. Do you have anything to actually, I want to ask another question. Let me reverse that. So, in doing this work, not only in coming to veganism through the animals, which means you are paying attention to what's happening there and what's happening at these different levels oppression. How do you take care of yourself in doing that work, in watching that reality and seeing the hard things and also finding joy?
Oh, wow. That's such a good question. Thank you for asking that. Yeah, it's been tricky over the years, especially since having kids. I mean, my bandwidth is
Mm.
just so overextended. And I've really come to a place of acceptance in my own identity. Wow, I am like a 35-year-old suburban mom. And it's, you know what? We need 35-year-old suburban moms and all of these movements. Like, it's not about, like, I used to live in the city and be at all the protests. I'm not there anymore, and that's okay. And you don't have to be
Yeah.
that kind of person to make
Yeah.
a difference. And there's so many roles for people to play. And we all have a place. And so for me, it's really basic these days, especially with a young baby who I'm nursing and like waking up in the night. For me, it's really like sleep, movement,
Yeah.
regular meals and snacks, drinking enough water. Like it's so basic. Just asking my husband to watch one kid so I can only be with the other kid. It's back to basics for me. I used to have this glorious morning routine with yoga, meditation, and tea. And that's not, sometimes I'm like, oh, cringe. Did I like used to promote that kind of thing? Like it's so narrow and privileged and not at all realistic for most people to have the kind of time to do that stuff. So yeah, and that's something I would encourage everyone. Go back to basics. Check in on your sleep, your nutrition, your hydration. Do you need more alone time? Do you need more time with people? Do you need a hug? What do you need? Go back to the
Mm.
basics. Like all of the to-do lists and like you said, the commodified self-care, all of that. Let go of that. Just check in with you. Like, how are you doing? What do you really need?
That's really powerful. Is there anything you want to share with listeners that I haven't given you space to do so? Not a
Mm,
trick question, just want to make
yeah.
sure.
Yeah, I would just say you deserve nourishing, tasty, yummy food. And you're not wrong for loving food and experiencing pleasure with food and craving food and enjoying food. Because there, unfortunately, because of our diet culture, can be a lot of shame wrapped up into that. So I just want you to know, dear listener, that you are worthy and deserving. And I hope that you can take care of yourself with food and that if you haven't had enough to eat yet today, while you're listening to this or as soon as you're done listening, please go grab a snack or have a tasty meal.
Mm, that is a perfect way to end. Thank you so much for being on the show, Taylor. I really appreciate chatting with you, you sharing your time, and just all the work you're doing. It is really inspiring.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
If you're hearing this message, you've listened to the entire episode of Consciously Clueless. And for that, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, tag me when you share in social media, or share this episode with others who may be interested in the topic. Any sharing truly means the world to me. Join the community at patreon.com/consciouslycarly for bonus podcast content like smoke sessions with Consciously Cannabis guests, video versions of solo episodes, monthly live calls, one-to-one support, more lifestyle content, mindfulness resources, and more. Until next time, stay consciously clueless.